Really lose people.
Turn on the camera view.
Is the camera on?
Yeah, camera's on. We're rolling. I just I'm
Live?
I'm not live yet.
Yes, you are. Tell them to start, and they can work through the technical, and I'll at least talk to them.
Who's telling you to start?
Can you see on my camera?
I don't know. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever I find you, or wherever you're hearing us. We have been experiencing some technical difficulties having the Honorable Suresh Prabhu join us. So I figured in the interest of time, we get started, and Suresh will be joining us hopefully shortly. They're just working through technical issues. So the purpose of this conversation, normally you have a fireside chat, you have someone on the other side of the fire and you have a nice chat, but today, until Suresh joins, I will consider you to be the other side of the fire and have a little chat on some of the challenges that we are facing in climate change, and quite frankly, the quintessential issues of time and how we address these issues. So what I really wanted to start with was talking about what it is that we are doing and what it is that we are doing that is not sufficient, and the fact that we're facing an existential threat, that we have to do something more meaningful, some thinking that's out of the box, something that's innovative, something that's going to harness the power of people who finally recognize that, yes, we are having a challenge and we have to address this challenge. So when you start by breaking down into the components, what is the challenge? The challenge is that we are facing growing emissions. The planet is heating up, and that is causing so many inadvertent or not purposeful events or not known events until now. But we do know that climate change is real. For instance, in Siberia, over 40 million hectares of land has burnt this year alone. In California, wildfires are raging. In fact, there's 3 of the largest wildfires in history are currently raging, most of them out of control. Whereas in Louisiana, Texas, and Florida, they're drowning in water. And then you go to the north in the Arctic, and what are we seeing? We're seeing ice sheets melting at an alarming pace. One day you're seeing temperatures in Fahrenheit in excess of 100, and weeks later you're seeing temperatures in the negative. Denver a couple weeks ago recorded temperatures that were near record highs, over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, which is over 30 degrees Celsius, and then days later to have snow warnings. So what further science do we need? I don't believe we need any. So let's break this down into a bunch of pieces that are easy to understand, because I think you need to understand the magnitude of the problem before we're able to address possible solutions. The magnitude is profound. If you think about it, 35% of the emissions, carbon emissions each year, pollution, come from 20 of the largest oil companies in the world. That's 20 of the largest oil companies in the world responsible for 35% of emissions. That is profound. However, let's be real. We can't expect these oil companies to stop pulling oil out of the ground because we as consumers are using it. We haven't made the migration to electric vehicles. We haven't made the migration to 100% solar, nor have we made the migration to 100% wind. But is there the potential to do so? We believe yes. But in order to be able to accomplish that migration, it can only be done with the cooperation of many, not a few. And as we meet this challenge, like the pandemic, it cannot be multiple groups looking at the problem differently. In fact, the problem has to be looked at on a universal basis because, as we know, pollution has no boundaries. Just as the forest fires that emit all the emissions into the air, the carbon emissions into the air, that carries over from country to country to country, and it affects us. The pollution is not only killing millions of people every year, but the pollution is impacting our way of life. So as countries around the world are living through this very pandemic, which has had horrific losses and impacts on so many families, multiplied with the outcry for equality among all, what we have today is a world that has lived through, it continues to live through the most aggressive virus that we have seen in our lifetimes. But what have we seen? We've seen nations from all over the world working hand in hand, sharing information, sharing data, sharing ideas for a vaccine. We've had nations sharing critical life-saving equipment like ventilators, PPE. We've seen for the first time in our lifetime that every nation around the world has said, we need to work together, and we can. So now, as the world races to find this vaccine, and there's no doubt that one will be found, the question is, what then? We don't have nations working together hand in hand today for a vaccine for climate change. Now, it's not that simple. The UN Global Compact has made tireless efforts. The team there has worked 10 years. If you go back to the COP, we're now past COP 25. That means we've been working for a quarter century to identify, agree that we have a problem. But the solutions that we have today, whether it's carbon tax or whether it's setting in place milestones or reporting guidelines, that's only part of the solution. We need to do something radical. And when I say radical, it's thinking out of the box. Why can the nations not all get together and find a way to eradicate plastic straws? Many nations have started. Why can we not get together and agree that plastic bottles are a thing of the past? You know, one of the sponsors of this event, a company by the name of Can Water, is launched water in a can. Simple, water in a can. 1 billion water bottles will not make its way into the ocean if we all drank water out of a can. Another one of the sponsors of the United Nations, this Global Compact Business Live, is a company called Ecopia out of Israel. Let me tell you something. This company has not only recognized the fact that solar is a growing energy, but they developed robotics in the form of a robot that cleans the solar panel without water. Because let's face it, climate change is part of the problem. There's other SDGs, but let's put it this way. If we don't find a way to ensure that there's drinking water for every child, every woman, and every man on this planet, then we won't survive. I would argue that we are so far away from hitting the targets that unless there is something radical and dramatic that happens, that there is change, and change starts with us. You know, when you look at where we are today versus 10 years ago, or better yet, imagine in your mind what the world was like, what the climate was like when you were a child. Where I come from, I mean, my memories go back to playing in snow that was, you know, in abundance, and snow came in the winter and the summer was the summer. We didn't have extreme weathers. Sure, we had the electrical storm here and there. We didn't see or live through hurricanes, 2, 3, 4, 5 hurricanes hitting the coast near the Panhandle of Florida, the Gulf of Mexico. We didn't see so many named storms. Now, some scientists will say, well, it's just, the world going through a bit of a change, but we know better. One of the things that I don't think the scientists took into account when they were doing their calculations to figure out how much time we actually have before we're beyond the point of perhaps reducing the emissions and we're moving to adaptation, I don't think they counted all the carbon that was locked up in those trees that are burning on all sides of the world. And that is working as an accelerator of climate change. And the more we pollute, we continue to accelerate. Many scientists believe that we'll hit such a point in the years to come, and not that far away, where the acceleration will happen at such a hyper pace that it will impact our ability to even adopt and mitigate. Now, we're going to survive because as humanity and society, we know how. It's just evolution. We will survive. But who wants to be looking back 10 years from now and saying, why did we not do something radical? Why did we not look at different ways to accelerate the deployment? Renewables, reduce the amount of coal emissions. Look at how we engage governments to not just commit on writing, because a commitment is words. What we care about is action. Why not commit that they're going to introduce electrical cars in the government? Why does not every government commit that by 2025, every single new vehicle they buy would be electric? Why do they not garner together and commit that they are going to shut their coal plants and go to other forms of energy? Well, let's face it. Some countries rely on coal as a source of employment. So it's hard for countries to overnight turn around and embrace renewables. The challenge with renewables is battery storage, because you can't just have energy when the wind blows or when the sun shines. The advancements in battery technology today, a myriad of them, are taking us to a point where in the next 2 to 3 years, batteries mixed with solar or wind will form baseload power. But the politics behind that is many utilities around the world are afraid of that. Why? Because they've built out all this infrastructure. How's it going to be paid for? If you're the CEO of an electric company where you have billions of dollars of debt sitting on your balance sheet, and you now have renewables coming online, that's a risk to you. But look at the oil companies. Over the last couple months, they've had to take tremendous write-downs. Recently, the CEO, Mr. Wirth at BP, announced that they are going more towards renewables. And they have a very bold plan to move towards renewables. And their belief, which is right, is that they could earn equal to or a better return investing in renewables as opposed to hoping oil lasts for a longer period of time. So this isn't just about the oil companies and the coal companies doing bad, because they've been doing what they've been doing for years. It's what we as humanity are doing each and every day. So how do you harness humanity? How do you get everyone around the vision that says, this is what we need to do? We could talk about it for a couple more years. We could wait till the world was in such a state that we had no choice but to act. The problem with that is, if we wait till that point in time, it will be too late. One of the greatest challenges of humanity is we procrastinate. That's what we do as humans. We think when we look outside and it's a nice sunny day that everything is fine. In some parts of the world, they look outside and they look at the amount of pollution. And if they or members of their family have asthma, then they feel impacted. They wear masks. Today, we wear masks because of the pandemic. I don't want to live in a world where we have to wear masks each and every day. I don't want to live in a world where we sit here and look back at 10 years from now and say we could have done better. Why did we wait? The key to unleashing The technology that's necessary is one thing and one thing only: the willingness to do so. You see, if you love what you do and you love what it is that you do each day, you have to think the ability to and do what I do today in 10 years from now. How will climate change affect me? It's almost like if we had a satellite image of where your home is today, and we took a picture of that, and then we showed you a picture of what your home would look like in 20 years, 30 years, 40 years from now. Now, if you live near a coastal city, chances are that water's a lot higher. Chances are that you're not going to be able to enjoy the same quality of air that you're currently enjoying today. So what radical things do we need to do? The UN, over 75 years has garnered together many initiatives. Global Compact being one. But they're a voice. They set some targets. They set some milestones. Earlier today, S&P, 3M, and Accenture published some milestones and some metrics that companies can measure themselves against. But that's a piece of the answer. That's not the solution, because reporting helps. It holds people accountable. But the solution lies in doing things that are radical. Let me give you an idea. If you really want to accelerate, let's say, for instance, renewables, how would you do that? Historically, countries around the world have run tenders and bids for everything they buy, whether it's for infrastructure, roads, or buying PPE equipment. Those typically take anywhere between 12, 18, maybe even 24 months. When you're facing a problem square in the eye, what do? You find a solution. We are facing this problem square in the eye. And I will tell you that what the UN has put forth is partnerships. In fact, the UNECE in Geneva has come out with a policy and have received the buy-in from so many countries on something called public-private partnerships. A public-private partnerships allows private companies to enter into contracts with governments to provide urgently needed services, supply. Look, in the height of the pandemic, as countries were running around looking for masks and gloves and machines that would save people's lives, did they go out to a tender? Did they run a bid and wait a couple months? No. They reached out. They reached out to companies in the business of manufacturing. They even reached out to automobile companies. Why? Because those automobile companies had the ability to manufacture the machines, the ventilators. I will argue to you that we are here today with something that's a lot worse than the pandemic. Because the pandemic, yes, it is horrible. And yes, the world will find a vaccine. But the challenge is this. Imagine if you didn't find the vaccine by a certain date, that generations upon generations of people's lives would change. That there'd be such monumental loss of life. The world knows that a vaccine is coming. Yes, it will take time. I don't believe it's going to be 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Maybe it's 2 months or 3 months. I'm not a scientist. I'm a realist. And as a realist, and someone who's focused in renewables for 17 years, I can tell you that we need a vaccine for climate change now. 5 years from now is too late. 3 years from now is too late. Governments around the world need to embrace partnerships, public-private partnerships. They need to allow private companies to invest in their country. They need to allow private companies and embrace these private companies to help them meet their needs. Our prime minister once said that no country can succeed economically without foreign direct investment. And that's true. Foreign direct investment is the key. There are trillions of dollars sitting on the sidelines looking for investment. So if you had a choice to invest in a gas or coal or oil company to earn a return, or invest in a renewable company to earn a return, your money should be going into that renewable company or that renewable project. But how do you harness that? One of the solutions that we came up with at Skypower is how do we work with the heads of state and provide something more than just power? How do you harness that?
Hi.
One of the solutions that we came up with at Skypower is how do we work with the heads of state and provide something more than just power? How do you harness that?
Hi.
Suresh, how are you? The solutions that we came up with at Skypower is how do we work with the heads of state and provide something more than just power? Can you hear me, Suresh? Suresh, how are you? The solutions that we came up with at Skypower is how do we work with the heads of state and provide something more than just power? Can you hear me, Suresh? Suresh, how are you? Suresh, we came up with at Skypower is how do we work with the heads of state and provide something more than just power? Can you hear me, Suresh? Hear me. Suresh, how are you? Suresh, we came up with at Skypower is how do we work with the heads of state and provide something? Are you there, Suresh?
Hi,
Okay.
Kerry.
Great.
Can I speak?
Yes, please.
How do we work with the heads of state and provide something?
We
Are
can.
you there, Suresh?
Hi, Kerry. Okay, so Kerry, can I speak? First of all, let me congratulate Skypower for organizing this very important event. And this is a very important year for the global community, because these are 75 years of United Nations which are celebrating. And at a time when the most important landmark, 75 years is not a short period, but none of the head of state will be able to attend in person, and they have been speaking from their own respective countries, from their own offices, and the heads of state will be addressing the UNGA from a long distance. But this also is an important time because it's a time to reflect, to introspect, to think together as to why this situation has arisen, wherein none of us can be there in person for such an important event. And therefore, the reason being that the pandemic, which has hit us, has prevented us from coming there. But just imagine, if one small little virus can stop the whole world, what would happen if the climate change becomes a reality and the temperature rises beyond 1.5 degrees centigrade? What would be the consequences of that on the whole world? And therefore, the United Nations itself was formed to keep peace in the world. The biggest threat to peace today comes from climate change. And therefore, climate change is the biggest threat to humanity, biggest threat to biological life, biggest threat to peace, and existential challenge for all of us. And in this time, I'm very happy that Skypower has decided to take a lead and not just organizing this event, but I can see you spearheading a campaign to change the energy mix of the world. If you can change the energy mix, it can actually help to address the climate change significantly. If you can stop burning coal, if you can start using cleaner fuels for mobility, if you can use the entire huge capability that the planet has offered us through solar to generate solar energy, I think we'll be able to get over the challenge of climate change and will exist because it's an existential threat. But at the same time, we'll be able to create millions of jobs. Today, the problem is how do you create jobs? Because as the pandemic hit us, it started as a health emergency, but now has become a big economic emergency. None of us can think about living life on the planet without earning livelihood. And the biggest threat to livelihood comes from climate change. So, if you can actually address climate change, you can actually create jobs, protect jobs, boost economy, and can actually change the entire face of this planet.
So,
Not just you and me,
right.
who are we're probably going to go away from this planet because of this climate change, but the entire biodiversity which will be lost. So I think I must congratulate Skypower for organizing this event at a time when there is a need for clean and greener energy.
Thank you, Suresh. I think the audience around the world listening and this video of this will probably be played many times over, because to me, I think we're at a profound time. We've known each other 20 years. I mean, just for those of you who have not had the pleasure of meeting or knowing Suresh, Suresh is not only the emissary and the Sherpa for the Prime Minister of India, but has also served in 10 ministerial posts, from energy to economy to the environment. He has served in aviation. He has driven foreign direct investment. So I'm so pleased that we worked out the technical problems, because, look, I think everyone understands the challenge we have. But with all the years of wisdom and your bio, I mean, it's 12 pages long. I know, because we were reviewing it last night, and I was trying to figure which salient parts of your experience would be really most valuable to the people listening. And then it struck me that all of them, because there are a few people alive today that understands the inner workings of governments, understands the bureaucracy. Look, as power minister, you helped to sculpt what today we are seeing in India, which is a renewable plan that's targeting 175 gigawatts. You and I shared this with you last summer when we were together here in Canada. You as the railway minister helped reinvigorate the entire railway, the largest or one of the largest railways in the world. I mean, to think that you were able to marshal 1.3 million employees. I think you're the largest employer in the world. And I've been in your offices in India numerous times, and I see how you have multiple meetings taking place in various places. So you have a unique ability to look at a problem from government, from bureaucracy, from business. You understand, as Minister of Commerce, what it takes to get foreign direct investment into your country. So here's where, just before you joined, I was saying that we have to think out of the box, because we've been talking about climate change for so long, and we're not doing any radical. And if we don't do something that's radical, then we're faced with a big problem. And it's not like the pandemic where you can get a vaccine in months or in a year from now. We need a vaccine today for climate change. And my hope is during this meeting that we have, that we can share, challenges. Like, how can we come up with something that inspires India, for instance, to transition the 6 million jobs it has in coal and go 100% renewable? We know it's not going to happen overnight. We know the plan's there. How do we inspire India? How do we take countries and have them move to a public-private partnership, as opposed to waiting to run a tender years and years and years? I mean, we work all over the world. We've had public-private partnerships. In fact, today in Africa, we signed a public-private partnership for solar energy, 1 gigawatt. It will hit the details will be public in the next 48 hours. In Uzbekistan, we signed a PPP, and you also know the challenges in terms of getting the government to give the necessary sovereign guarantees so we can finance the project. In other countries, we're signing bilateral direct agreements, one reason only. We want to bring the renewables now. So the governments that respect their contracts, the governments that are forward-thinking, the governments that are visionary, those are the governments that are going to lead us to a new path. So with your years of experience working in government, 10, I mean, it's hard for me to imagine holding 10 different portfolios and now being the emissary of the G7, G20. You meet all the heads of state every time you're at the G7, the G20. You meet the banks, the investors. Tell us, what is the magic formula to get them to all work together now?
It's a very important question because acting now is very important. If we do not take that first step forward at this particular time, we will not be there to take any more steps because there is nothing to go beyond this point. And therefore, the first step should be in the direction of changing the energy mix of the world. To do that, we have abundant sun energy. The sun always shines. Whether you see that or not, sun is always shining. And I always say that sun never takes a break. It never is a lockdown for sun. There is never a forced homestay for sun. Sun is always out at the right time. And therefore, the solar energy can be the source of permanent energy for the whole world. Actually speaking, many people are thinking about different solutions. Everybody agrees that the sun rays are actually good for many reasons, including for health reasons. So solar energy can actually be the solution for many things. Now, once you want to do that, I'm very happy to note that Prime Minister Modi has come out with a brilliant idea. He thought about an institution called International Solar Alliance. Many countries are joining it, many already have joined it. As you correctly said, if we can make the whole world commit to solar energy, it could mean that a total scaling up of capacity would result into huge prices, can actually bring in accessibility, can bring in clean energy to everybody. And to do that, it is not possible for the governments to do it all alone. Because government's ability to invest is limited. And governments have to invest into healthcare more than before now. Governments should invest into education. Governments must build so many other kinds of infrastructure, roads, railways, and others. So if we can actually get a private-public partnership in place, wherein government guarantees private sector certain obligations, certain responsibilities, and private sector brings in technology, brings in capital, builds a power plant. Imagine it's a game changer. Africa, with 1.3 billion people, is waiting for energy. Central Asia is waiting for energy. Asia, generally, is waiting for energy. And therefore, those who are unfortunately not yet connected can actually get grid-connected electricity from solar, but also off-grid solutions. And all of this can really transform the lives of people, can actually upscale the entire economies of the world. And then after 10 years when we meet at UN at 85, UNGA at 85, we can look back and say, my God, that was a major decision that we took. And that decade has changed the entire shape of the world. And to do that, can make everything. Economy, environment, energy, climate, social issues. Because if you give electricity, people are getting educated because they can read, they can do this. And electricity the wrong way is also a problem.
But how do you get them? Like, I'm sitting here, what you're saying makes sense. Imagine every country says they picked, okay, solar. We are going to build in 10 years, we're going to build or buy 2 gigawatts, 5 gigawatts, 100 gigawatts. And what you're saying makes sense because if each country committed how much solar they're going to buy, then the manufacturers know how to ramp up. The manufacturers know the notional markets that they can sell into. And then you have a sense of knowledge of what is going to come out of that sector, and businesses will address that in public-private partnerships. And that could be replicated for wind. It could be replicated for hydro, for run-of-river hydro. And what you're saying actually rings true because in India, the economy of solar only came about because Prime Minister Modi, and I know you were the main architect of that plan 10, 12, 15 years ago, set a target and said, this is how much solar we are going to buy. And then the market came in and behind that and addressed it. But it was clear, this is how contracts are going to be issued. This is how we're going to go ahead and move forward. This is the local manufacturing we want. See, that makes a lot of sense. But the problem is, as I said a couple of minutes ago, that governments seem to believe that, well, you know what, a contract, they come in, they sell power at this price, and then 2 years later, the price is less. So maybe I should wait 2 years to get a lower price. That's procrastination. What they are missing is if they buy today at, say, 6 cents, and in 2 years from now, it's 4 cents, their average is 5 cents. And let's face it, energy is necessary for the growth of an economy. Solar lasts 35 years. A solar panel has a life of 35 years. But how do you get, so what you're saying has been demonstrated. India is a case study. How do you get the other nations in the world to embrace something that's 3 billion years proven, more being the sun, that shines every day and rises and sets every day and is reliable? How do you get the nations of the world, the leaders of the world, to say, that's it, we are buying renewable energy, this is how much we're buying, this is the dates we're buying, and we are making this a law, a commitment? How do you do that? How did you do that in India?
See, first of all, in some countries of the world, there is a law called Renewable Purchase Obligation. Germany also did a lot of pioneering work in this. Some other countries are following it. But I think more importantly, honoring contract is very important, because investment can come in abundance, and today it's a very interesting situation for the world. There is so much of money available in the market. The liquidity is all-time high. The cost of money is all-time low. The interest rates are nearing zero, and the liquidity is going through the roof. At a time like this, it is important that money can chase, investment can happen, but honoring contract is important, because both equity holders as well as loan holders will only invest when there is a sanctity of contract. We are showing the way, India. We are going to bring some amendments to our existing law to make sure that there will be honoring of contract through some authority. That is something like that must be put in place all over the world. There should be something like the UN must take responsibility and also show the way of how do you create a global framework in which more investment can happen in the right source of energy. Because if you don't invest right source of energy, the emissions will go up. And if emissions go up, to reverse it might take another 50 years. So therefore, if you commit a wrong policy, the consequences will be for long, long time to have. So therefore, making investment today will be dependent upon the investor's choice, the financial institution's priority, and therefore when some of the financial institutions belong to the government, and therefore the government also has responsibility, and they also feel that if you don't honor the contract, why would my institution will be safe? And to make that happen, I think we must come out with a global framework of how can we have a public partnership model. What is the model agreement? Number two, how can we have an enforceability of contract globally? In India, for example, we have a regulatory framework. I think we really need to create an ideal regulatory framework in all the countries of the world so that we can move toward this. As I said, International Solar Alliance is a very important body. It is promoted from the ideas of Prime Minister Modi. We collaborated with France. Many countries are joining. And recently, there's the first ever summit which Prime Minister Modi inaugurated for technologies into solar power. So that is one important end will happen, that technology will come in. The second important end is the commitment of the global community to solar power. That will also happen. The third important element will be financing. And financing can happen if there is a legal sanctity of contract. And therefore, I think if you can put that in place, private-public partnership is necessity, but that will not happen unless there is a legal framework that is created within the country to honor this contract, and that can pave way for a huge investment that can come in. In fact, we are seeing everywhere in the world. People are waiting to invest. And once investment happens, this will again boost the economy, because more or less all the countries of the world are seeing contraction of their economies. The global economy is contracting. IMF is reduced. Always, whenever they make a fresh projection, they are saying the contraction will be more than they thought before. So at such time, economic activity can take a boost. And if you make wrong investment, for example, if
Yeah, you see,
invest in fossil fuel,
right. What you're saying is a model that we know works. You see, here's the thing that we experience. I can tell you as Skypower. So we're pioneers, and we go to countries that other companies don't go to. We look to these countries where we can bring meaningful foreign direct investment, and not just investment, not just power, but jobs. So we go into a country, we bring not only solar energy, we bring a form of profit sharing, if that's the model they like, in a PPP. Some prefer it, some don't. Some prefer just to have jobs, but we bring local assembly. We make pieces in country, because IRENA published a report recently. I mean, there's millions and millions of jobs. In fact, solar creates more jobs than any other industry in the world. But when you go to a country, and we are in 36 countries developing around the world today, you're working with the head of states, the ministers of energy, and they really want the power. The challenge that we find is that it may be like in this country I mentioned earlier in Central Asia. I mean, look, you look at a country like Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan is a country that has it down to a science. They have rules, they have published, they have guidelines, and they issue a contract, they issue a guarantee. And that's a model for Central Asia. And they're much more advanced than Uzbekistan or any of the other countries. But when you get into these countries, some of them don't feel the need to honor a contract because maybe someone comes with a lower price. So not respecting, as you say, the sanctity of a contract hurts that country. So I had an idea. And actually, it's something that we've talked about as of late, and that is, look, all these countries that really need power in Africa and the other parts of the world, they are recipients of funds from the World Bank. World Bank, EBRD, Asian Development Bank, but mostly the World Bank. If they made commitments and didn't honor their agreements, the only way to motivate them to follow their commitments and be honorable is the World Bank. If the World Bank, which is a culmination of the wealthiest nations' funds going into these countries, if the World Bank comes in and says, look, if you don't honor your commitments and you don't meet your targets, you are not getting additional funds. And that should hold true for human rights, renewable energy, education, and money going into infrastructure. Why would a country get $4 billion from the World Bank, let's say last year, or in the last 12 months, but not honor its contractual obligations to build out the infrastructure? And that therein lays, it's a hammer. So you're right about getting these countries to commit and put contracts that they're going to honor, and public-private partnerships bring it together. But absent some form of enforcement, they just may not have the desire to follow the rule of law and end up fighting in court and losing the power or schools or healthcare equipment for their people. I think the World Bank has to play a much more active role in ensuring enforcement and honoring contracts of these developing countries. Otherwise, investors will not go.
You know, actually, as I said, that governments have obligation to provide electricity, and through electricity, a better quality of life, and employment, that also happens through electricity. Agriculture in most of the countries, because they have to draw the groundwater, happens through electricity. Industrial activity happens through electricity. So electricity is very important. Now, all governments have a moral, legal, social obligation to give electricity to all, and that will require trillions of dollars of investment. Therefore, governments have to be freed from this responsibility. They have other investment priorities, so they will obviously be looking out for options. This is one sector which has become bankable. In renewable energy, we can clearly see private sector willing to invest. There are some other sectors, private sector may not be interested to invest. but it's one sector where it is possible to invest. And if they are interested, obviously, that helps government to divert their resources into something else, which is still more important. And to do that, as I said, investment will presuppose the security of investment, and that can happen only through contract. And therefore, contract responsibility is very important. I suggest that some global international body like United Nations, which is multilateral, which is international, intergovernmental, in which they must take the lead and show the way to the whole world as to how to create model contracts which are good for all stakeholders, which will attract investment, which will benefit the consumer, which will also bring in better technology, and over a period of time will transform the lives of people. And to do that,
Well, they tried.
I think
They
this
tried.
is important.
But Suresh, they tried. So you look at the body, it's connected to the World Bank, the IFC, and the IFC has been going at random into countries, both developed and undeveloped. And their intentions were good, was to come in and to help a country kickstart their renewable program. So the IFC would come in, they'd sit with the leaders of a head of state, they would provide them with a standardized contract, they'd provide consulting work, they'd even provide financing. Now, it's kind of strange that they would be effectively a developer / financier / responsible for the bidding, but that was their model. Like, they went in and they would try to help these countries, and they would do a small amount, 100 megawatts. The unintended consequences of a poor strategy and poor planning we're seeing. And what it is the IFC would go into a country, they would put out a tender for 100 megawatts. That tender would come with a guarantee from the IFC, not from the country, from the IFC, which is as good as a investment grade country's guarantee. And they would see record low prices. Instead of maybe 6 cents, they'd see 3 or 4 cents, because obviously if it's more bankable, then you have a lower cost of funds. And then they pack up and they leave the country. What did they do? They left the country with this impression that the price of energy is 4 cents. And effectively, they've killed all potential competitors from coming in. They've restricted competition, not only in that country, but surrounding countries, because the ministers of energy of those countries on the periphery, they can't run a tender or do a bilateral at 6 or 7 cents, which is the true cost of power. They're hoping to get 4 cents. So in effect, the IFC, in an unintended way, froze the market of Africa. If you look at the net new additions in Africa, for example, in the last 7 years, as to the population growth, it's negative. And I believe that power, as you said it, power is a human right. Every woman, child, man, every human being deserves to have basic electricity. Kids can read at night. Women can go home at night, not have to run before the sun sets or afraid of being assaulted. The world needs power. And, the idea of having one contract that is universally accepted makes a world of sense. What I'm saying is the World Bank should say, hey, you're free as a government to contract with anyone you want. Here's a standard contract. And if it's for power, you need power, you're free to contract, provided it meets a price medium that is a market price. And set loose the entrepreneurs to come in to meet that price. Now, if you don't honor the contract, then the World Bank is not going to be so kind to you when you're asking for $2 or $3 billion of funding for other initiatives. The only way, look, the UN is a body of United Nations. They don't have the ability to hold a government accountable. They can push the government in the right direction. They use diplomacy. But at the end of the day, countries are acting on their own free will. The only control that is outside of those countries, which impacts them, is the funds they get from the World Bank for their infrastructure. And I'm talking about the countries that have no power. This is new power, not replacement power. And I think that the countries that all are bringing on new power are more profound and require more attention than the countries that are migrating, like Germany, who's migrating to more and more renewables, India, who's migrating away from coal. But in India's example, you still have coal as a huge part of the country's energy. How do we accelerate that? What makes that go faster? What gets those coal plants, like in Ontario, we shut down the last coal plant. what is the plan for India to do that? And maybe that's the model that other countries, Vietnam and others that have operating coal plants and some countries are planning new coal plants coming online. What is the model that works that says stop with the fossil fuel, put your money in renewables? Like Mike Wirth at BP, he's going to renewables. Why isn't Chevron? Where's Exxon? Where's Shell? Like, they're dipping their toes in the water. Where are these companies? Why are they not here at the Global Compact showing the world leadership by saying, hey, instead of 50 billion this year going into fossil fuel and finding new oil and drilling holes, we're going to take 10% of that and put in renewables this year, 15% next year, 20% the next. Why are we not demanding that they do that? Why are we not saying, if you don't do that, then we are, as shareholders or as the world, not going to look with you with the same glasses that we do right now? I mean, shareholders are speaking out. Their stock has dropped precipitously over the last few months. 60, 70 billion of value has been wiped off their balance sheets. Now's the time to really push them. Now's the time to push the world, but to a vision that is achievable, not just we need to be more renewable, we need to put in solar. We need a solution. And we turn to you, Suresh. What do you think if you were the head of, let's just call it the United Nations of Polluters, and you had to come up with a rule, a plan, a solution, a single one that's easy to understand, that would set the world on a course to meet its climate change objectives, what would you decide, and how would you put it to work?
Actually, this particular year of United Nations is also important from another perspective, that is to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, if you really look at each and every of Sustainable Development Goal, it needs investment. It investment in social capital, it needs investment in physical capital, it needs investment into human capital. It needs investment of all kinds. Now, when you need that investment, the source of investment is virtually all over the world is the same. Either it can be government, which can put in money. How the government raise money? From the taxpayers. Or you get money from multilateral agencies, which again, multilateral agencies like World Bank or Asian Development Bank or African Development Bank will also raise money from some government. So that is another source. The third source is private capital, which is far, far bigger than all the other sources that I talked about. Now, all the three sources are the only sources through which you can create all these important activities which will lead to achievement of Sustainable Development Goals. Now, this investment, without that, Sustainable Development Goals will not happen. And if we don't have Sustainable Development Goal, the whole world will again go backward. And therefore, to get that investment, it's always important, as you mentioned about World Bank, to take the example of World Bank. The World Bank is financing a project. Any country of the world, they will first insist on a proper contract, because they will say that I'm going to finance this particular project by giving loan. There is other family of World Bank group organization called IFC, International Finance Corporation. International Finance Corporation can finance private sector. They will say, I will give money provided there is a contract. And contract is a beginning. But what is the validity of contract is far more important. Otherwise, contract remains a piece of paper. So unless there is a enforceability, sanctity of that piece of paper which can be converted to legal obligation, it no value. So even World Bank and institutions of multilateral nature, as well as obviously the private sector, will always look to this mechanism. So to achieve Sustainable Development Goal, investment is necessary. And to get investment, such type of financing is necessary. And to get financing, contracts are necessary. And those contracts which are enforceable is something which people will be look forward to. So in a situation like this, if World Bank can take a lead, it is also possible that they can think about, because World Bank, more or less all the countries of the world are the members of the World Bank, they can take a lead and can say that this is how a model contract should be drafted. They should say that once they make it, they should involve the regional development banks like the Asian Development Bank, African Development Bank, and others to also say that they can work with the World Bank Group and actually adhere to certain high standards, and the countries can then make necessary laws to support it. I think India is one country which believes in sanctity of contract, and we like to definitely move towards that. In fact, our government, Prime Minister Modi, is really looking forward to huge investment of more than $1 trillion that will go into infrastructure in the next few years' time. In fact, he has already unveiled a plan for making that investment. And one of the key components of that plan is private-public partnership. Whether it is water, whether it is roads, whether it is ports, whether it is airports, whether it is something to do with energy, or even something to do with social infrastructure like healthcare and education. So it's a very ambitious plan, and that plan also presupposes investment from the private sector. So private-public partnership, in which government will play a very key role of facilitating the project to take place, ensuring that hurdles are removed, but ultimately the larger public good is served only when you can create an infrastructure, when you can actually offer the facilities to the infrastructure to the people. And to make that happen, the government and private sector must come hand in hand along with the World Bank Group and others to actually work together to harmonize this approach to achieve the sustainable development goals, which in turn can actually improve the quality of life. And I'll tell you something. Once you achieve the sustainable development goals, you will see a better quality of life for people, but also better economic activity. When people will have more money in their pocket, they will start spending more, and the economic activity will take a very positive turn for better. And to do that, energy is one key component, because without energy, you cannot have any industrial activity, agriculture, anything. So I think this is a very good. If we are at a crossroad, let us embrace the right path. Let us make sure that we have a sustainable future, a future which can be handed over to the future generations. Otherwise, we'll just take everything away with us, and we'll disappear, and the whole world will disappear at the same time. So I think
so I'm just going to stop you there a second. We're going to run out of time, but I want to just synthesize and make sure I understand your advice. So what you're saying is that, the IFC is, they only do tenders, and tenders is like a thing of the past. It doesn't happen fast enough. They have challenges, conflicts. They run a process, and many people like Skypower, we're not interested in being part of an IFC tender because it just takes too long, and we want to change the world now. We want to bring power now. So what you're saying is, if the World Bank were to come out with a globally accepted contract that said, here's power, this is what you pay for it, or here's water, this is how you pay for it, this is a contract, and that was a contract that everyone knew was bankable, then the World Bank says, hey, if you're, whether you're Uganda or Suriname or any developing country in the world that wants to have clean power, if you sign a contract like this, we will give a guarantee to help lower the cost of financing, because let's face it, no country is going to buy more power than they actually need. But the challenge is, in Africa, by 2050, the UN is forecasting that 750 million people still won't have power. I say that's unacceptable. So that is really bringing in, and maybe that's the answer. Maybe we got to all turn to the World Bank and say, hey, you're giving all this money, that's cash going into these countries. We don't want to stop you from continuing to give critical dollars, but if you also gave a guarantee to the investors, the only time that guarantee would be called is if those investors did not get their contract honored or the utility didn't pay. I think that is a brilliant way, because that is a body that controls the purse. If I want to control the behavior of one of my kids, as most parents do, either they take away the car keys or they take away their allowance. I'll tell you, it fixes the behavior real quick, right? But here's another way of looking at this. And, there's something called the 1% rule. Imagine if every government or any government in the country said, you know what, and even my own government, 1% of every deposits made at any bank in Canada, or 1% of the withdrawals, get a 1% fee taken off. That 1%, and that's a great way to get funds for for projects like water that's necessary for agricultural in many of the countries in Central Asia, for basic roads and infrastructure. 1% of every dollar that goes into a bank is grabbed by the bank and put into a fund for the sustainable development goals, and particularly whatever the core need is, water or infrastructure, coupled with a World Bank who's administrating and overseeing a contract that's universal and holding governments to account to honor those contracts. Does that give us a brighter future? Does that put us on a better road to getting a more sustainable planet? Does that work? Would you put that plan in place?
In fact, this is a very important issue, that how to create public good. That is what we are all discussing. To create public good, you need investment, and investment can come only when there is a money available. Then only you can make investment. So who has the money globally? So those who have the money, they will put in money only when there is a proper framework. So I think World Bank kind of organization must really can guide the global community about the kind of framework that we must put in place, wherein this will facilitate the real creation of public good by partnering with all the players. And this particular forum of the United Nations is basically for engaging with private sector, because even United Nations has realized that without the participation of private sector, will not be able to achieve the sustainable development goals. And to involve private sector, because private sector has shareholders, private sectors have stakeholders, and all the stakeholders and shareholders also will have to be assured about their well-being along with the public good to be achieved. So this is a very interesting and very good win-win situation that can emerge, that we can achieve public good through government support, private participation in a manner that can take everybody's concerns on board. Everybody is assured about a fair play for their own contribution. And to do that, I think it's a good idea that larger body like UN, the World Bank and others might join hands, and actually, because World Bank and United Nations and the larger global family is convinced that participation of private sector not only brings in money, probably brings in technology as well as other co-benefits. And to do that, if we can actually make a proper platform, a framework, a situation in which national governments will also be properly taken on board, and all of them together can come out with a platform that could really help in working on a most laudable objective and a most ambitious target that we kept for ourselves to achieve the sustainable development goal in a foreseeable future, so that we can lead a much better, sustainable, everlasting, long life. To do that, I hope what you suggested could be a guideline to everybody to follow. But I really appreciate the contribution of you and your company to promote these ideas. I thank the United Nations for actually involving all the partners into this uniting business. That's what United Nations Global Compact idea is. I think I really feel that this compact is something very important, and if you want to compact something, then you must make sure that all of them who are going to be part of that are properly taken on board. So I think it's a very good beginning, very good idea. Let me, we are running out of time, but actually speaking, not only you and me are running out of time, not just the organizer, the world community is losing out of time. Because if we don't act now, probably will not be there to act at all. Therefore, I wish we all act together and take all these issues on board.
Suresh, we are out of time, but I want to thank you very much for participating. And, I always believe that a call and a meeting of minds and a spirited debate should result in something. So I would like to suggest, you and I should probably chat offline, and maybe we put something in front of the Global Compact to consider bringing to the World Bank. And maybe with your insight and perhaps with India's support, maybe we can take this idea and this conversation to something meaningful, because otherwise it's just been a nice debate with some really great inspirational ideas. But in the spirit of action and accomplishing something, I really would like to take this and bring this to a next level where it could actually be considered. Suresh, your experience, your time, I know it's late in the night for you. Thank you very much for everything you've done for India. Thank you for what you've done. You're an amazing human being. You're your vision, your wisdom, and the sage experience that you have. I think people who are listening today and will listen, through videos that are distributed, will take heed of some of the comments that you gave today. And it's time we start acting. Remember, we need a vaccine for climate change. We don't only need one for COVID-19. That's well in the works. We need to find a vaccine that's going to work so our children have a brighter future. Thank you again, Suresh. I appreciate your time and all the best to you and your family. Stay safe and healthy. Thank you.
God bless you. Thank you.